Okay, now we're going to look at solving some linear inequalities. We just worked on equations. Now we're going to work on linear inequalities, which we follow the same steps to solve linear inequalities than we do regular equations. We still are going to clear fractions if we have them. We're going to clear parentheses if we have them. We're going to move all of our variables to one side. We're going to move all of our constants to the other side of the inequality sign. So we're going to do a lot of the same things. The thing with inequalities is you're not going to get just one number answer. You're going to get a less than or a greater than or a less than or equal to or greater than or equal to. That involves a set of numbers, not just one particular number for an answer. And we'll talk more about how to write the answer in just a few minutes. When we're solving linear equalities, the only thing you have to really remember that's different from regular equations is that if you divide by a negative number, you have to flip the inequality around. So we're going to need to remember that. All right, so let's look at number one. We've got 4x plus 3 is less than or equal to 6. So when I start that one, I've already got my x's on one side, so I'm going to move my 3. I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. So I'm going to have 4x is less than or equal to negative 6 minus 3 would be negative 9. Divide both sides by 4. So I'm not dividing by a negative number this time. So I'm just leaving my inequality just like it is. So negative 9 over 4. So x's are less than negative 9 over 4. So let's talk about how we can write this answer. All inequalities are written, one way to represent them is to use a number line. So let's draw a number line. And here's 0. And since this is negative 9 over 4, as a mixed number, that would be negative 2 1/4. Remember, negatives are moving down to the left of the equal sign, so I'm going to mark. So negative 2 1/4 would be right about there. I'm going to mark it with a line instead of that circle, and you'll see why in just a second. So negative 2 1/4 would be right about right there. Okay. Now, I need to represent all the numbers that are less than or equal to negative 9 1/4. Well, if I'm going to be less than negative 9 1/4, that means all the numbers to the left of negative 9/4 would be an answer. So there's a couple of different ways to represent that. When we're talking about on a number line, we are going to look at something called interval notation, and we're going to show interval notation in a picture form on a number line. And some things you need to know. If you have less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, you're going to mark your endpoint with a bracket. It depends on what direction you're going in, whether you do a left bracket or a right bracket, but you will have a bracket if you have a equal to in your inequality. Now, also that could be represented with a closed dot. There's a couple different ways you could show these graphs. I'm going to use the brackets when I show you the answer, but just keep in mind you may use a closed dot on homework. That means the same thing as a bracket. If you have just less than or greater than, no equal to involved, then you're going to put a parentheses to mark your endpoint. That would be the same thing as an open circle. So when I'm looking at x's are less than or equal to negative 9/4, I'm going to have a bracket. Let's use a different color so you can kind of see it. I'm going to have a bracket at negative 9/4 because I have an equal to in there. And then if I'm going to show less than, I'm going to point an arrow to the left. That's going to give me less than negative 9/4. So this would be your graph representation. Okay, another way we could write it is to use something called interval notation. And that's when we're going to use brackets or parentheses, but we're not going to put them on a number line. We're going to show the range of answers. Now, when we're thinking about a number line, we need to think about going all the way to the left, I'm going to negative infinity. Going all the way to the right, I'm going to positive infinity. So when I'm writing interval notation, I am following this number line graph. So when you write interval notation, until you get used to doing it, it is very, very common to need to draw the number line graph to be able to see your interval notation, because I'm going to write my interval notation just like I have done this arrow and bracket. Notice the arrow is going all the way down to negative infinity. So my interval notation is going to start at negative infinity. You write interval notation from left to right, just like you would a sentence. Okay, I'm coming from negative infinity and I'm stopping at negative 9/4. That's my stopping point. That's my end point. Now, when we're talking about infinities, whether it's negative infinity or positive infinity, those endpoints always get a parentheses. So a parentheses at negative infinity, because you can't really ever get to infinity exactly. On my graph, I have a bracket at negative 9/4, so in my interval notation, I'm going to have a bracket. So there's the interval notation for negative 9/4. X's are less than or equal to negative 9/4. The last way to write it is called set builder notation, and that's when we use these little brace things. This is set builder. Don't really use set builder a whole lot. You're going to see more having to write it in interval notation. But when we write set builder, we do X's such that. Now that X and then that line going straight up and down, that is just a notation. That doesn't have anything to do with working out the problem. But X is such that, and I found out that X was less than or equal to negative 9/4. You're really just putting your answer in these little brace things. And then you've got the X with the straight line saying such that. So that's the 3 ways you can show an answer on these inequalities. So let's look down at number 2 and let's try that one. Again, this one, all the X's are on the left side already, so I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So I'm going to have negative 3x is less than negative 3. Now, on this one, I'm having to divide both sides by a negative 3 in order to solve for x. So I have to remember that when I divide by a negative number, this inequality is going to flip around, and now it's going to become a greater than. Then negative 3 divided by negative 3 is a positive 1. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to switch back to blue for my number line. I'm going to draw me a nice long number line. And in your homework, the number line is going to be drawn for you, so that's good. And then on a test, I will make your number line more than likely is going to be drawn on there. Okay, I need to mark a 1 here. Let's just say here's 0. So here is 1. And this time I had a greater than. I did not have an equal to, so that means that it's going to get a parentheses, not a bracket. I had no equal to in my inequality, so you can't get a bracket unless you have an equal to. And this says x's are greater than 1, so then greater than goes to the right. Less than goes to the left, greater than goes to the right. On inequalities, it's always a good rule of thumb to put your variables on the left side, because if you do that, then when you read it, you can't get your graph wrong, because you're going to point your arrow the same way that this inequality is pointed. My inequality is pointed to the right. My arrow on my graph is pointed to my right. All right, so interval notation. We're going to follow my graph. My graph starts on the left-hand side with a parentheses and a 1. And then my graph goes all the way out to infinity with that arrow, and infinities always get a parentheses. So that would be interval notation. For set builder, you're going to write it with the little brace things, x's such that x is greater than 1, and then close your braces. Okay, the next one, let's look at clearing the fraction first. Now, I have a negative 6 on that one. So when I multiply both sides by negative 6, that works the same way as if I were going to divide by a negative number. If I multiply by a negative number, that's going to make that a negative 6. I'm going to flip that inequality around like that, and then I'm going to have these negative 6 cancel, and I'm going to have 2x plus 5. Now, Some of the ones in your homework may give you an inequality where your x is not on the left side. I'm not really crazy about that because it seems like people will get their answers messed up when you don't have your x's on the left side. So I'm going to rewrite this, and I want to see if you can understand the way I rewrite it. I'm going to rewrite it over here as 2x plus 5 is less than -6. I was really careful. I wrote my 2x plus 5 on the left side. I made sure I'm pointing to the 2x over here, so I made sure that I pointed to the 2x when I rewrote it. Now let's solve it just like we normally would. We're going to subtract 5 from both sides. So 2x is less than -11. Divide both sides by 2. So x is less than -11 over 2. All right, so on this one, if we're going to write the interval notation, I want to draw my graph first. Here is, let's put 0 up here because we want to have a negative number. -11 over 2 is the same thing as saying -5.5 if I were thinking about a mixed number sometimes, or divide that out in a calculator and get -5.5. So that's going to be somewhere down here. Let's just say -5.5 or -11 over 2, same thing. Now, I'm saying the x's are less than the -11.5, so I'm going to change my color. Let's change it to red. And it's less than, so less than is going to the left. I'm getting a parentheses because there is no equal to, so my arrow goes to the left. Now, if I'm going to write, I'm going to mark out this problem. So if I'm going to write interval notation, then I'm going to have -infinity to -11/2. Let's leave it in an improper. And I'm going to get a parentheses there because I had a parentheses on my graph. Remember, there was no equal to in our inequality, so I can't have a bracket. And then set builder would be the little braces, x's such that x's are less than -11/2. And that's how we're going to do some solving inequalities. If you have questions, be sure you email me or send me a message. I'm not going to work that last one on the bottom of the page. You don't have any in your homework that are that involved, but be sure to email me with questions.